Here. This is essentially a carryover from the meeting we had last week where we were with you folks making final recommendations to our city council on items that the committee had been considering over the last several weeks. As a result, the council meeting, last budget hearing, I think there were a few more items that we've added to the list of items you're going to be considering today. So we're going to try to wrap it all up today and get to, some decisions from the committee on what to recommend to full council. So we'll start with a couple items that were of information that were requested by the Finance Committee. One was on the potential for increasing funding for street trees. And then the second is the idea of a long-term strategic plan for Measure C. We're giving you some feedback on that idea. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Jill Zachary. She is the Parks and Recreation Director, and she'll spend just a moment on the first item.
So for the Finance Committee's questions related to street tree planting, we took some time and met with Jim Dewey in the Public Works Department to look just at fiscal year 19 and the plans for street and sidewalk improvements, thinking that would be a way to begin a discussion. Based on the work effort that they have planned using Measure B funds, we determined there's an opportunity to plant up to 175 trees in street parkways, and that estimated cost to purchase the tree, make the soil-related improvements, install the tree, and then maintain the tree for a year because it does require watering. But we would use the gator bags that you're seeing increasingly throughout the city, about $95,000 a year, and that's based on our current contract costs that we currently have for tree planting and tree care. When you look at sort of citywide, we estimate there's around 3,400 vacant street tree sites in the city, and this is based on our street tree inventory and then other aspects of information that we've developed over time where we've evaluated the infrastructure considerations for a number of city neighborhoods and determined where there are vacant sites, where there could be trees. In some cases, there's a vacant site and it wouldn't be appropriate today to put a tree there. So that would represent about 5% of the vacant areas on city streets.
Questions for Ms. Zachary? Okay, thank you.
So the other item is a long-term strategic plan for Measure C. And before we get to that one, there was one item that we didn't put on this list, but it relates to the Library Plaza. And that was some information requested, I think, by Councilmember Friedman. But in any case, we have Jessica Caliente from the Library Director to speak to where we're at with that project. So I'm going to switch to a different PowerPoint and ask Ms. Caliente to come up.
Good afternoon, Chair Hart and council members. Jessica Caliente, Library Director. I'm here to expand upon the Plaza update. I would like to start off by providing you a history of the project. In 2010, $150,000 was allocated to the project with RDA funds, and then in 2011, landscape architects Campbell & Campbell were hired, and they performed a series of public workshops that were very well attended and where many of the ideas for the project came about. Unfortunately, in 2012, design work was halted due to the dissolution of RDA, but in 2013, funding was restored with library gift funds, and that also allowed for the expansion of the scope of the project. The original project was for the front upper plaza off of Anna Pamu, and now the current project takes on the entire exterior property of the Central Library. In 2014, the library received project design approval from HLC and went back several times in 2015 to discuss conditions, and then in November of 2015, HLC final approval was given to the project. In June of 2017, Phase 1 construction began, which was the ADA compliant entrance on the south side, and in August of 2017, that was completed. Again, looking at the existing conditions, this is how it is today. A couple of the items that were very important to stakeholders looking at this project was the lighting and the visibility throughout the upper plaza. For lower plaza, pictured on the right, the delineation between vehicles and pedestrian walkways was a critical element of the project, and that is addressed in the final design. Here is the proposed entry from the Anapamu. You can see this project focuses on flattening the entire plaza to create accessibility throughout and highlights the Faulkner Gallery. HLC requested that the design looked at the Central Library of the 1930s. You can see it harkens back to those reflecting pools and focus again on the entrance to the Faulkner Gallery. This is an image of the upper plaza prior to the museum staging. As you can see, the planters and the grading does not allow for accessibility for any of the programs or events that the library or community would host. And again, this is just another view, a bird's eye view from Anapamu looking at the final design. You can see there is imagined vendors and other activities taking place. One of the key elements that was discussed throughout the design was the paseo between the library and the museum. As you know, many paseos connect the heart of Santa Barbara and the downtown corridor, and this paseo currently is more described as a cattle chute than a true paseo. The proposed paseo removes all of the planter walls as well as widening it and improving the lighting. This is a view from the Laura Cotta or Library Avenue side. So you can see this is the expanded scope taking in the lower plaza and again just connecting that to the upper plaza. And I do want to acknowledge the excellent work of our public works staff at the City of Santa Barbara. As I mentioned previously, last summer they began the transformation of this entrance, and in just a few short months this beautiful ADA compliant entrance was created, and now from the library parking garage people have access and no longer have to walk all the way around to Anapamu. And again, the idea behind the plaza is really endless in terms of what we could do. We really focus on the library as culture, art, and education. This project isn't just for the library, but something that is really for the community in the downtown area. And just to give you some ideas of the projects or things that we are thinking that we can do on this space, festivals, movie nights, performances, music and dance, outdoor games. Summer, every day at this library, we host lunch at the library. It would be wonderful to take that outside. Children's programs, oftentimes we reach capacity and do have to turn away children and families because of lack of space within the walls, so it would be excellent again to take that outside. Maker activities, while it's amazing again to have slime and paint in the library, it'd be great to have it outside as well. And then gardening workshops, we do a lot of partnerships with UC Master Gardens, and it would be, again, just an extension of the programming to be able to take that outside. And being in the cultural hub of Santa Barbara, inviting the entire community to do block parties and things of that nature. And then public art. Santa Barbara is known for its art, and this space would be a perfect place to demonstrate that. And then the rental revenue, as I mentioned in a previous meeting, outdoor venue comparisons between $220 and $410 per hour. And just a reminder, the Santa Barbara Public Library is positioned between the courthouse and the art museum in the heart of the Santa Barbara Cultural Arts and Commercial District. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Gadiente. Is there any questions? Councilmember Friedman?
I had a couple of questions. If you could go back to slide, I think it's 2. It's the process of what's been done to date. So all that work has already been done, but what remains to be done in terms of engineering and any permitting? What's the next steps for that?
The next steps would be going to final design of the construction drawings.
And then if you could go to slide 6. So I just want to clarify, you touched on it, but the utility of the plaza as it currently is it does create some safety issues, especially if you're looking at, I guess, the bottom left of that corner where you can't, it's hard to see some activity that takes place there. So this project would not only benefit us in terms of having arts and culture in there, would also mitigate some of the illegal or activity that we don't want down there, correct?
Councilmember Friedman, visibility was a unanimous highlight of the stakeholders, being able to see throughout the property for both safety and just the being able to highlight the beauty of the building, both.
And thank you. And then I had on slide 24, you mentioned the rental revenue, it comparable to other areas. How often now do we? I know the museum in those issues, but prior to that, how often did we typically rent out the plaza, or how frequently?
Councilmember Friedman, in my tenure, not frequently.
So it is a missed opportunity there. If we were to go forward with the renovation, we could actually see some generation of revenue in that area.
It is thought so, yes. Currently not being accessible to segments of the population limits the amount that you can use the Upper Plaza in particular.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dominguez?
The parking lot next to, or the Phase 1, did that impact the entry? Are we doing anything to that parking lot entry down the line, or is that going to stay how it is currently configured?
Councilmember Dominguez, the ADA access entryway, are you speaking to from the parking garage to?
From the driveway into the parking lot. And I'm sorry, I'm a little under the weather today, so if I need to repeat my questions for clarity, let me know. The driveway, cars coming into the parking lot, is that going to change at all? Or did that change?
Yes. Right now it's in a temporary state, as we also are working with the museum on a transformer project. And so that project, coupled with the Library Plaza, will meet at the end in order to redo that entire area.
So can you show us on a slide what that means exactly?
Slide.
Mr. Chair, while they search for that, I just want to chime in that I don't want people to get their hearts set on the reflecting pools. We believe that state law has been changed in response to the drought, so it may not be allowed. That's just one of the things we'll have to address in final design. But they're a beautiful visual component of the renderings we'll show you, and we might have to come up with something equally beautiful to replace them if they're not allowed.
Thank you for that clarification.
The other question I have, the rental revenue, have you guys studied the rental revenue for that part of downtown? I know the courthouse has several facilities that they rent out. Do you know what percentage occupancy they're experiencing?
Councilmember Dominguez, we do not know their percentage of occupancy, just what they charge. But
So
we
you
can
you haven't
definitely
studied
research
it,
that.
so we're hoping that we'll get revenue, but it really seems like it's more for library use and for your programming than, or do you have a?
Well, we could go back and look at that information. We do expect to, we actually do receive inquiries for especially the lower plaza that's currently open. So it is the belief that it would extend into rental opportunities, but we could definitely contact those other agencies to see what that actually means annually.
Okay, and you've received inquiries, but you said no one's used it, and I can understand why, walking by there, but it is something that I'd like to see, even just a back of the envelope calculation, how many times you'd want to rent it. If, again, only if you're using this rental revenue in our deliberations as something that's going to bring down the cost. If you're just throwing that out there as just kind of a secondary benefit that might come true, then it's a lot less important.
Yeah, it is a secondary benefit at this point.
Okay. So the driveway,
This is the only image that we have. Is this the area that you're questioning? The Library Avenue driving into the lower plaza?
so what's the change?
It's all grading at this point.
Okay.
So it would, again, flatten it out and meet that ADA approval and combine both the changes that the museum has made and the Library Plaza design.
Okay, so that has or hasn't taken place?
The museum piece has begun, but again, it's just a temporary until we can do the design for the plaza.
So you're talking about the grading by the museum or the driveway that comes from
All of it.
Anacapa into the parking lot?
All of it.
So it's all going to be regraded?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
And there are other people here today that could possibly answer these engineering questions in better detail if that's something that,
That wasn't really an engineering.
Okay.
I was just trying to
Well-
picture it in my mind. Thank you.
Mr. Wilshire, did you want to add something to that? Are you coming forward?
Hello, Councilmember Dominguez. To answer your question, Jessica pretty much had it spot on, but the project was done in phases, so that south entrance, the curb that you're looking at right there, that'll be a temporary curb, so that little kind of 10-foot stretch there is temporary. Library Avenue itself, the function of it will not change. It'll be regraded and still be the access to the parking garage. There will be a new rolled curb or some sort of transition that'll allow delivery vehicles back into that lower plaza, so it'll serve a similar function, but it'll be cleaned up and all the grades will meet code.
Any other questions for Ms. Caliente? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Wilshire.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Jim Dewey to come forward to speak to Measure C and the concept of a strategic plan.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Jim Dewey, the Streets Operations and Infrastructure Manager. At the last Finance Committee meeting, we talked a little bit about having a long-term plan as far as the streets infrastructure was concerned. And so I put together a couple of slides that talks about different funding levels that we need in order to meet our goals in terms of the pavement condition index, which is we're trying to reach a pavement condition index, a PCI of 70. Right now we're at 58. And one element that is affecting our funding right now, of course, is the SB1, the additional gas tax. Of course, there's a ballot initiative coming up in November to repeal SB1. And basically what that means to us is that we would lose about $2 million plus a year in funding for streets infrastructure. So we'll have to see how that turns out in November, but that will affect our timelines as far as our plans are concerned of reaching our PCI of 70. But I do have 4 scenarios here, and basically there's 2 scenarios that include the SB1 gas tax and 2 that exclude it. 2 of them are based on $14 million in total infrastructure investment just in paving in order to reach that. And this also includes these different funding levels also include all of the non-pavement assets, which amounts to be $56 million over 20 years. And I think we've talked about what our planning for all of our infrastructure was. So that was all part of that plan. But in scenario 1, we show we would need about 60% of all Measure C funds. So right now, Measure C is planned to generate about $22 million. So we would need about $13.2 million a year, and we would achieve our PCI of 70 in year 18. At that point, we can start leveling off on the amount of money that we spend on pavement and apply that to other things. Likewise, in scenario number 2, if we lose SB1 funding, we're going to have to move that percentage up to about 66%. That would be about $14.5 million. We'd reach our PCI of 70 in 20 years. Under scenario 3, this is at the $13 million pavement investment level. We would need 53% of Measure C to do that, and that is including SB1. And then moving to scenario 4, this would be a scenario without SB1 funding. We'd need about 61.5% or $13.5 million a year. We'd meet our PCI target of 70 in year 26. And so this graph just shows basically what happens with our PCI over time based on those 4 scenarios. The 2 top scenarios had the investment of $14 million per year. The 2 bottom ones are at $13 million per year. There was no point in going below $13 million because once you drop below that, we never reach a PCI of 70. And are there any questions?
Are there any questions? No, this is really helpful. It shows you how important it is to maintain that level of investment.
And just to add to this, when we talk about the police building in 5 years and bonding for that, we don't know what it's going to cost, but the original estimates or the last estimates were around $8 million per year debt service. So if you look at the $14 million pavement investment, the balance of our $22 million estimated revenues would go toward paying off the bonds. We have a little bit of our opportunity the first 5 years before we get there, but that's kind of order of magnitude what we're looking at.
It also demonstrates how critically important the retention of the state gas tax is to all the plans and how they fit together, and voters should be very aware of that, the importance of that decision to the city. Councilmember Dominguez?
Couple questions. So the 70, I'm trying to remember how we arrived on the 70 as a goal. Can you refresh our memory?
The 70 PCI is once you get above the at-risk category. So on average, all of our streets will be in good condition. So there's a point where, the breakover point is like at 68 PCI, and then above that you start getting into a good category. So historically, we've been able to maintain the streets, this was many years ago, in a category above 70, and it's just a good sound practice to do that.
So that's really considered a minimum. So, and I'm just trying to put this chart into context. If we have the money, we want to at least keep it at 70. So what would be any pros or cons to going to 72?
The pros to going above that is that as we maintain our streets in better condition, we can see some cost savings in doing that. We put a little bit money up front, more money up front, but our ongoing maintenance costs decrease the better the condition, overall condition of our streets are. But there is a point of diminishing returns too as you get too high.
Committee members, Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director. I just wanted to mention too, the 70 is actually the goal or the standard set in our CAFR, our budget document for the condition that we are trying to maintain our streets in. And as Mr. Dewey said, it helps us to manage costs appropriately because as you go below that, it gets much more expensive to repair streets.
And at what point in time do we put that number to the CAFR?
That's something we've done a number of years ago, and we set that as sort of our target, and we have to essentially report when we start falling below that, so it's really a disclosure issue for us.
So is there a cycle that cities would revisit this goal?
No.
Or any triggers?
No, there aren't.
Okay. So and it strikes me this is pretty conservative then. So I just want to make that kind of the general context to this. This is a very conservative, very cheap plan because we're just getting up to the bare minimum to avoid these extra costs of having to go back and do more extreme road work. Is that framing it accurately?
I would say that 70 PCI is a standard practice.
And does the scale go up to 80 or does it go up to 100?
It goes to 100 and so a newly paved street. So for instance, the Shoreline Drive, after we finished paving that, before it started getting cuts into it, was at 100. Mm-hmm. But 70 is in a good, somewhere, 70, 75, it's really return on investment. We can do some of the cheaper, more production work on keeping those streets in good condition for less money and keep it high so that it doesn't dive down. As we start to see it go below that, then you're starting to get into the underlying street structure, and that makes the projects much more expensive. So it's not only how it affects the drive and how they look. And I do want to say that poor condition streets not only cost the city money, they cost motorists money because it causes wear and tear on cars. And so trying to keep them in good condition for that reason as well is important.
Right. So the next question is, we had talked about which streets and the order and the prioritization. Is there any information forthcoming to that series of questions?
Not today, but I have prepared several maps that show our short-term plan and also our long-term plan. I can get those to you.
And the report, I believe you said you use a software system and there's a report. Is that part of the maps or is that something separate?
It is not. The report is a modeling system, so it doesn't necessarily tell you or indicate exactly what streets that you're going to be working on, but rather the categories of streets and the treatment that they need. And from that, we do a lot of, we have to choose which streets and try to coordinate that with all the utility work that's happening in the right-of-way.
Could we see a sample of reports that system generates, please?
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Councilmember Friedman?
Just a couple follow-up questions related to the chart in slide 5. Measure C is projected to raise, was it 22 million a year? And it was mentioned that we can't fall below 13 million a year funding to get up to, we'll never get to 70 unless we do 13 million. So my question is, in terms of the projections for Measure C, does that take into account the current economic conditions? And if there should be, if there should be a recession in the future, and then also we're dealing with, as we're going to be discussing in the council later, the issue of tourism coming into town, sales tax, and all those issues, and it looks like our numbers have been off. So how do we account for those type of numbers within this chart?
Committee members, $22 million was our estimate when we put together the recommended budget for next year only. It's a one-year estimate. It's going to change every year. Hopefully it'll grow every year, but it doesn't reflect any recession that might hit us in the future for sure. Yeah, we're seeing some impacts now, but it's not, I don't think it's going to change those numbers too much. I think $22 million as a working number for now is something we can use. Next year we'll update those numbers.
And then Committee Member Friedman, the other moving part then is on the expense part, and that's going to cycle up and down based upon the economic cycle. When you're in a competitive bidding climate, it's more expensive. But if you do hit a recession, we still have Measure C in place that a lot of communities don't, and so you might find an extremely favorable bidding climate at that time. And then also materials cost will fluctuate. There's just a lot of different moving pieces.
Any other questions for the Public Works folks? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Samario?
So I'm going to go through the other items that are sort of outstanding, but first bring up some of the things that the committee we think already have supported or has supported. So that we went through the general fund revenue assumptions, the staff recommended adjustments. There were only 2 where we adjusted where the energy study was going to be accounted for and funded. And we wanted to remove 1 project in the streets fund that was completed this year and so we don't need it next year. We went through a number of proposed fee adjustments, both the general fund and enterprise funds. I wanted to just point out that one of those was sort of newly brought to the Finance Committee. We had proposed an impound fee for scooters of $100. The committee thought $500 would be more appropriate. We're going to bring back more information on June 19th. We're going to have an item for council. We're going to talk about scooters and this fee in more detail, so I think we can hold off on that item for now. And then within the proposed fees adjustments, there was a proposal to increase fees in planning and building to fund additional positions. So you heard that, and that I believe we got support for that. So these are the additional items beyond what we think we've already heard on. These are where we're looking for specific recommendations from the committee. The first, and I'll go through them individually quickly, and there are staff here who can speak to them in more detail if you like. So the city attorney, you'll hear more today in their presentation, but there is a request for 2 positions, a deputy city attorney and a legal secretary too. And this is really in response to the need for additional support for community development. You heard at their presentation that the request for another 1.5 positions as project planners in response to major workload projects that they're working on, and this is to support them through those efforts. And then in the library, there was a discussion item of allocating $500,000 toward the library plaza to jumpstart a capital campaign. You can see there's a $0 amount there to the right because we presume that would come from existing capital funding from either general fund revenues or Measure C, that we would be just shuffling the deck on that. And then we had the fire position, the public education coordinator. It's a 1 full-time equivalent position. 99,000 is the net number. They have 20,000 budgeted now for a part-time hourly position. So this would be if we were to fund a full-time position, what the net cost would be. And that's, of course, that's under discussion as to whether we need a full-time or not. the impacts of the library of the county board action on the administrative fee and allocated costs. We know that tomorrow they're going to be considering this and may restore that funding or impact. And then this is the first time you've heard this. You know, we mentioned to you a couple months ago when we presented mid-year and those kinds of things that there's a potential that we would see an impact to our sales taxes and bed taxes next year as a result of the Thomas Fire and the debris flow. We assumed that it would be sort of a short impact, but we did not at that point adjust next year's revenues. We'd hoped that they'd come back. We are starting to see just from latest revenues for TNT and COT and sales tax that maybe that's not the case. So for now, we believe that next year's numbers are probably too high by the order of $375,000. We think we probably should be lowering that and then funding that out of reserves. So that'll be something we'll be asking the committee to support for council approval. But it would be coming out of the economic contingency. We mentioned that would be a possibility. That's what those reserves are for. It just kind of creates a structural problem next for 2020, but we think it's the right thing to do. It's too late to be making adjustments to the budget for that, but to adjust the revenues down by that amount, I think is appropriate, again, from reserves. And then there was a request for an economic development strategic plan. Our estimate of that, best guess estimate of that would be $50,000, a one-time item. And then the request from Visit Santa Barbara for $150,000, a one-time request. And there are two representatives from Visit Santa Barbara who are here, Noel and Jessie Lynn. So if you have questions about what the status, I know they have made some progress on obtaining funding from other agencies, and I think they have made some progress. So if you have any questions about that, they're here to answer those. So this is the list, and this is what we're here to kind of get your direction on in terms of how we move forward. Again, just, we have a balanced budget, and so we would need to come back on, hopefully with some ideas on Wednesday, if to the extent that any of these things were supported, how we actually fund them. We have some general ideas, but we really aren't prepared to kind of go into the detail today. But we would come back certainly in 2 days with some thoughts based on what you do recommend.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. We have 2 speaker slips. Actually, are there any other questions for folks while we're at this point? No? Okay. Milt Hess, followed by Ann Howard, and I think we have one more speaker slip coming up too, which is Joan Young. Mr. Hess, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Chair Hart.
Oops, let me just get your microphone on, just 1 second. There we go. Now
Am
you're
I
in
on?
business.
Okay. Thank you, Council Members Dominguez and Friedman. Good afternoon. My name is Milt Hess, and I'm here today in my role as Vice Chair of the city's Library Board. When I became a member of the Library Board 5.5 years ago, the design of the renewed plaza was already well underway. I remember that we did not know where the money was going to come from to complete the project, but we were enthusiastic about the design. There was a vision. During the time since, circumstances have changed in 2 significant ways. One, the Art Museum undertook its major construction project and has been occupying the plaza for the past year, and there is no firm point in time when that will stop. And the other is voters approved Measure C, potentially providing a source of funds for the capital project. So once the Art Museum vacates the plaza, we're faced with the question of how to pay for the development project. The library has a short list of other important capital projects tightly focused on the needs of the library and its mission. The ADA-compliant elevator, the creation of a teen center, restoration of the roof terrace, and the renewal of the East Side branch library. So let's not pull resources from these projects to fund the plaza, because I think it's important to recognize that the plaza isn't exclusively a library asset, and its redevelopment is not entirely a library project. The plaza is a key link tying together the major civic and cultural elements of our downtown district, and so it's very much a city asset. As such, the project rightfully should be funded primarily by the city as a capital improvement program. Yes, there are other potential sources of funding as well. The Library Foundation through a capital campaign and the Art Museum through compensation to the city for its use of the plaza as a staging area. But who should take the lead in funding this important infrastructure project? Clearly, I believe it's the city's responsibility to take this leadership role. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Ann Howard.
Thank you, Chair Hart and Council Members Dominguez and Friedman. You heard from me a few days ago about the library, about the plaza. We've all seen the benefits of the plaza here from Director Caliente's presentation. I'm just here to make it clear that the foundation is expecting the city to take the lead on the plaza with Measure C funds to get that delayed plaza project back on track. We are a small, rather new nonprofit foundation here. We came into being to build the children's library, and we're ready to keep on going. We raised $4.5 million for the Children's Museum. Half of that came from you all, from the city. We have another $1.5 million for the endowment, and now we want to go on with this long list of projects that our library needs. But as Mr. Hess said, we don't see that we are the first source for a major piece of our city's infrastructure, the plaza. We want to help. We stand ready to partner with the city, but we're not the biggest wallet in the room, I guess I want to say. So we're looking forward to helping. We want to get on the doors to the Faulkner, the doors, the Anapamu doors on the library, the teen center, the second-story rooftop garden that would be revenue generating. We want to see all those programs going on out there. But I just want to remind you that we're waiting for you all to get this thing back on track. And then we'll be able to come in with our capital campaign. Thank you.
Well, thank you for clarifying our partnership with you. I appreciate that. Ms. Young, Chair of the Library Advisory Board.
Thank you, Chair Hart and Council Members Friedman and Dominguez. I'm here to add my voice to Milt Hess's and Ann Howard's that I feel it is the city's responsibility to maintain the city property that is the Library Plaza. It's not only the cultural link, but it's also an ADA project as well, which allows accessibility to and from the library and to other areas in the downtown area. So I feel very strongly that we are looking to the city not only to jumpstart the project with the generous $500,000 from the general fund, but to factor this into your strategic plan on how to spend the rest of the money so that the Library Plaza can add to the vibrancy of our downtown core. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Thank you for your service, too.
Thank you.
Any other comments from anybody in the audience? The folks from Visit Santa Barbara want to make a presentation while we're at this stage?
So Kathy was here, I think, last week, and she gave you the full presentation. We just wanted to follow up with what we've received to date. We have commitments from the Valley and then also City of Goleta for funding about $20,000 towards the proposal. And we just wanted to give an update on that. I guess I wanted to ask if you had any specific questions that weren't answered the first time during the proposal.
Any questions? I did have a question. Is there any way, and this is, just off the top of your head, so I don't know that you're going to have this, or maybe our staff can help, understand, TOT revenue generation by jurisdiction? Say the city of Carpinteria versus the city of Santa Barbara, the unincorporated South Coast County, city of Goleta, and I guess now we're also talking about the San Ynez Valley, to get a sense of proportion of the benefit of, the work that you're doing by jurisdiction, so that we might imagine, a proportional share of this $150,000 ask. Very much appreciate the work that you've done already to get some other funding partners in the equation with the $20,000. It would just help me to understand, is that the per TOT revenue generated per capita contribution that they're making? Are they being more generous or less? And, that would, I don't know if you have that.
I don't have that. I don't know if you
Okay.
can speak to that, Jesse Lynn. We promote the Santa Barbara South Coast, so we are promoting equally our partners. I can follow up and get that data for you if that would be helpful.
Okay.
Following your
Or
presentation.
perhaps our staff has some sense of that, even just proportions by
Yeah.
percentages. Are we about, half or 2/3 of the TOT generation in the area, or?
I don't know exactly. I mean, we are certainly the highest in the South Coast, but not far behind is the city of Goleta. They've added a few hotels, and they do pretty well. They might be at half or 60% of where we're at. We're about $19-20 million TOT right now. So there may be around 10 or so. And then I think Carp and then San Ynez area is, distant behind. Maybe they might be in the $4 to $5 million range. I'm not sure. Maybe even not that much.
Okay. Well, that would be helpful, I think,
Okay.
to us to just kind of understand where a fair share of this $150,000 commitment might be. And that just helps us, I think, in our deliberations. So maybe our staff can work with the Visit Santa Barbara folks to get us some additional information about that.
Yeah, and I think that Kathy's also coming on Wednesday, so we can circle back with her. She's traveling today, so she wasn't able to be here. But
Well, perfect.
yeah, so she'll be here on Wednesday.
And thank you
as well.
both for coming today. Appreciate that.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Councilmember Dominguez?
I would just save my questions for visit for Wednesday with Kathy. And are you, actually, I guess I will take that back and ask one more question. Is there an ask to any other cities, and you'll have to come back up to the mic, is there an ask to any of the other cities that's still pending?
So while we've asked the San Ynez Valley, we have specifically also asked Solvang CVB and Buellton CVB. So we're looking at programs to where they'll either all come in together or potentially separate if one, say, wants to come in when another doesn't. So we have asked all of the individual cities themselves.
So you're still waiting to hear?
So we
Did
should
you
have
give
more
them a deadline?
information. One of the cities is looking at it today, so she's out of town, so we're hoping to hear very soon. By
And-
Wednesday, we'll make the deadline.
Excellent.
And we're looking at a $10,000 buy-in per partner
Oh, great.
as well.
And the 20,000 was from whom? San Ynez Valley and Goleta?
And Goleta, correct.
Okay, great, thank you so much.
What is the proportion between the San Ynez Valley and Goleta? Is it 10-10?
Correct.
Okay. Councilmember Friedman?
And have you reached out to City of Carpinteria and the County of Santa Barbara?
So Carpinteria is not part of our T-bid, so we wouldn't be able to promote the city of Carp. And then, sorry, what was the other question?
The County of Santa Barbara.
The County of Santa Barbara. I don't know if that we're in discussions. Do you know that? But I can follow up with you as well on that.
Yeah, the county would be an important partner since they do have some of the larger hotels and the unincorporated area on the south coast here.
Okay, we'll find out about that as well.
And then could you explain more about how Carpenter is not in the T-bid? They chose not to be part of this. So the private sector industry made that decision, or the city council in Carpinteria?
I think it was the city council, and that's been actually for a few years now. They initially were part of it, and then they chose to pull out of the T-bid. So we haven't been able to include them for several years now.
Okay, but of course, when you're advertising the south coast of Santa Barbara, they benefit whether they pay or not.
Yeah,
to
and we
some
always,
degree.
as part of our marketing efforts and our content, we always specify what is the city of Santa Barbara South Coast, excuse me, and we have content on our website and through other channels. So we try to make a pretty clear delineation.
Okay.
But of course, they're probably naturally going to,
Benefit to
reap
some
some of the
degree.
benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it's to the committee. Councilmember Dominguez.
So I want to just start with the library because that's the biggest number. I want to start with, what I think everyone agrees universally is true, which is that the plaza needs fixing. It's not in great shape, and the ADA is a big component of that. My only concerns on the other side of the balance sheet are the revenue, and with the 73 loss of sales tax revenue, that's a concern. The SB1, when is that going to be on the ballot? Is that June or November?
November.
Okay. So unfortunately, we won't know about that, and that's a huge, how much revenue does that provide us?
It's over $2 million per year.
Okay. So that could really change our decision. So my kind of compromise or reaching out would be if we could delay the decision or figure out a way that it's contingent upon these revenue sources not disappearing or not further decreasing. Because the other side of the coin is the programs we could fund with that money. I'm concerned with how much programming we can do on the plaza. I certainly want to see the rooftop fixed because I think we can control who's up there better and the safety of the kids. I've taught high school and I am familiar with safety, having worked in public safety as a prosecutor, so I'm always thinking about what's the angle to worry about. And from the pictures I saw, is there no fencing between the plaza and the street? And I know this is an area that Santa Barbara has differed with a lot of communities in terms of whether they're fencing things off or adding cameras, and it certainly should be part of a broader discussion citywide with all of our capital infrastructure projects and our assets. But
Committee Member Dominguez, there is no fencing. It is a wide open plan, and again, increasing the visibility of the plaza, which actually increases the security.
and so the same token, you're reducing the landscaping.
Correct.
And at this point, it seems like it's pretty much just going to be a very plain, simple, elegant stone platform.
That is correct.
And so one of the problems we have now is people laying down and sleeping and depositing carts and suitcases and smoking. And do we have any security features worked into this plan?
Committee Member Dominguez, in 2015, the City Council gave the library director the ability to create citable rules, which we worked with the city attorney to do. And those rules help us maintain the exterior of the property as well as the interior. So if you go to the library now, you'll see that there are restrictions on cart sizes or the amount of items that can be left. And so vast improvement, even with the small space that we are currently dealing with, which things could compound greatly if we did not manage it. And because of our new rules, we're able to maintain that, as well as with our partnership with the police department and helping to maintain the entire property.
So it's going to be a continuation of our current policies, if I can boil it down?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm concerned because I'm not sure how effective those policies are there now, and it's different because of the staging. I know our policies around the city aren't 100% effective. I don't know what percentage you would call it, but different parks are overrun, and a lot of playground equipment's not being used in areas, I think, because of safety considerations. So one thing I'd like to see, either no matter what happens, is refreshing the security element of this plan and rethinking what the use is going to be. I mean, do we really expect kids to be out there, particularly if it's hardscape? I mean, most of the school programs I see are taking place on grass, unless you are bringing out tables and chairs.
Councilmember Dominguez, there is still an element of grass in the plaza design, and the idea is that the flat area can be used. You can put furniture on there. But overall, I think that the idea that, as you saw in some of the images that I provided, the flatscape, whether it's dirt, grass, or a hardscape stone material, would allow for similar programming throughout.
And the difference in terms of programming you could do there versus the roof is just a matter of scale?
Yes.
And what's the size or area difference? Is it 2-to-1, 3-to-1?
I couldn't say for exact measurement. I would estimate that it's closer to 10-to-1. The roof terrace is quite small in size in comparison to the entire exterior property of the plaza.
Okay. And then are there other programs that we're looking at, either, say, for parts of the cities that don't have a branch library, that this would compete with city funds for, like the Mesa and the West Side? Do we currently have any operations there?
Currently, we do not have any physical operations. What we're working on are mobile operations, so taking our mobile on the go van to the Mesa or to the West Side to allow for checkout and doing pop-up libraries and things of that nature. I mean, there's always hope for the future to discuss actual spaces on different parts of the city, but currently it's more of a mobile operation.
Okay. Because that's my concern, given the what we're learning about kids and schooling and after-school programs and the lack of resources that are available on the east side and the west side after school. There's a lot of great programs out there, and the east side library is amazing. Mm-hmm. But to the extent this would potentially compete with a program we could help fund or more scholarships to programs, that's a concern. And I think everything I'm raising are issues that can be dealt with and still move forward this. I just want to bring these up to see if we can get any answers in the near future. And the enthusiasm I've heard from my colleagues probably makes all these questions moot. But I do want to bring them up. I think that's all the comments I had on the library.
Councilmember Friedman?
So just to clarify, we'll go through each one of these individually, or
Yeah,
or
I
do we
guess,
want to?
that's a great question.
Yeah, that probably
Is
makes
that
sense.
what you'd like us to do? The problem is context, and we can't do everything, and so we're going to have to figure out some trade-offs. We did have question to council about the library communications outreach staff and/or additional person. Did you want to talk about that as well at this hearing? It's not on the list.
Chair Hart, what we did after the library department budget hearing was started to develop a plan for bringing in a trainer from the state library to assist us in creating a communication plan with our friends groups and starting there and looking to bring in the chairs, vice chairs, and other members of our various friends groups for training on that topic.
It's not exactly what I was thinking about.
In terms of the position, there is not one that currently exists within the city that is a Friends liaison. And in looking at other libraries throughout the state, that position does exist in some, but it's typically in libraries that might have upwards of 80 Friends groups that they need to focus the communication on. So the size of and the number of Friends groups that this library has a full-time position to do that is probably not the best use of resources. The library has various positions that would probably be before that, such as a social worker or things of that nature that could help throughout the city. So looking at a position of a Friends liaison, we would have to create that type of position.
Right, that was exactly the point of having the discussion at the council level, was to elevate that as a priority and make that, something that would be happening. Not, I understand your position, which is that's not your highest priority. I think the council has a different view about the importance of that, and so I think our discussion was, we want to see a plan maybe to do that. Now, if you have a different way to accomplish the same goal, as I said before at the previous hearing, I'm open to that. I want to see that, but I don't think developing a plan is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for executing better communications with the partners. And that can be a reallocation of existing staff. That can be a reprioritization of the need to do that. There's lots of different ways to do that, but I think there's a big missing gap in that isn't being met today.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
kind of continuation of the conversation last week. We hear you. I didn't hear a clear majority of council say go fund a position in the library to be this Friends liaison to the other communities. So in all due respect, we're still kind of struggling with direction, and we certainly know your interest.
Right.
We do think there's this resource at the state level that comes down and trains Friends groups about what it means to be Friends groups, what their role is, and how to be more effective at fundraising for Friends opportunities. We thought that was getting somewhat at your desire. And then Ms. Cadiente was also talking about getting a better structure and communication with the Friends groups. We clearly hear that there's a feel and a need to have better communication with Friends groups. And so we are identifying ways to do that more effectively with existing staff.
Okay, well, it was pretty clear from a majority of council that folks were interested in knowing about this issue and having you come back and bring different proposals. So I'm disappointed that hasn't been done. And I don't think that was ambiguous from the council meeting. There was not clarity that we would fund it and pay for it, but there was clarity to bring forward proposals about that. So I'm disappointed that there was a miscommunication about that.
And I apologize. We've had maybe 5 working hours since the meeting from Thursday to right now. And so I think it's a little unfair to expect of us to have come back with a variety of options for you at this meeting. We can come back with a little more discussion on Wednesday night, but it's very tight turnaround to come up with a new plan for a new position and new program to kind of meet your needs. I
And
think
I-
council can set the priority and direction and even set money aside if you want to help fund a position as part of the budget process. Then we can have the time to more strategically develop it.
And that's a different answer than the first answer, and I appreciate that. If it's a time constraint thing, I think I understood that when we talked about it last week, and there wasn't a lot of time between now and then. But, the first answer, we're not doing it, and we're going to get a plan, is different than we didn't have time to work on a plan.
And again, Mr. Chair, we work for you. So the fact that we came up with an answer that we want to take advantage of state resources, if that's unacceptable to you all, give us direction and we'll do it.
Okay.
I don't like quibbling with you, but,
Right.
Give me 4 votes and tell me to find $100,000 to put into the library budget for a staff position and I'll do it. We
Okay.
follow a majority of council and you set the lead by setting the budget direction.
I think the reason why there's a little tension in this is that, my recollection of this discussion in the past is that the council has spoken pretty clearly about this, that there has to be more work done to collaborate and communicate with our partners, and that happened to a degree, but not to a sufficient degree. So I think that's why there's more to this than has happened before, and we need to elevate the intensity of that and make it clear, that this can't go on. And it speaks to, the collaborations and the partnerships with the Library Foundation as well. Really critical, speaking to Councilmember Dominguez's points. Having that partnership is extremely important to fulfilling all the capital projects that we're looking forward to. And having that, work well and investing the time in communications in that regard is an investment on leveraging our very scarce public capital dollars with the foundation and the Friends. The Friends are a great resource that can be better utilized from a fundraising standpoint with the right relationship. And so that's what I'm speaking about, is that we need to spend the time, with library staff to attend Friends meetings, be present, be there, build up those relationships so that we can have a good collaborative partnership with all the people that are involved in this to be more successful.
Thank you. We hear you. I just don't want any misperception. I think we do have a good relationship with our foundation. I think they've said so over the last 2 meetings. So I don't want any implication that there's been a lack of a good working relationship with our foundation. And our local Friends groups, I think you also heard testimony from them that they feel there's been great communication there as well. I think the difficulty has been more with the branch libraries, the non-city libraries, and the Friends group associated with that. And clearly we hear the need and necessity to have better communication with them going forward.
Okay, well, I'm not going to go over and over again, but some of the public testimony in the last meeting was that there wasn't enough communication with the Friends. That's what people said. How often does library staff attend Friends meetings?
Chair Hart, so we have, several Friends groups. We have our City Library Friends, Central and East Side, and the Central Library Friends meet monthly, and we do attend those meetings each month, as well as the foundation meetings. The county branch Friends groups, we do not attend every meeting, but we do send staff. For example, last month was an annual meeting, I believe, for the Montecito Library, and so we did send staff to discuss future programs and things of that nature. So we are communicating with them. I think that maybe it's a discussion of, again, what are the roles of each of the groups? And we are here to help them be the best advocates that they can be and to partner with them. But sometimes there are some issues such as personnel or budgeting that are an administrative decision at the library department level. And so we're negotiating that right now, I think, in terms of everybody understanding what role we all play.
And that's the role that you see for the state library, to provide that training to the branch Friends groups for them to understand the relationship between the library and their organization?
I think for all of our support groups would attend that. I think that there's always been this idea or a plan that we bring all of the Friends groups together. It's just a matter of finding the time to do that. But we absolutely value everything that each Friends group brings to the table. We do struggle with staff capacity in terms of, we have one supervisor who is helping all of the different branches and on their very public-facing initiatives. such as the collection, programming, things like that. And so to take time away from her job doing that, to have her attend Friends meetings, just means that there's less done in the public-facing role. And so we are negotiating how we can be better. We absolutely always want to be better. This is not, set in stone that we're one way and we aren't willing to be flexible or change. But we are growing and in a transition phase as a library. The Central Library and East Side Library have gone through a tremendous growth over the past few years. And now we're really figuring out how we can push all of those initiatives and programs out to the branches with the support of the Friends groups. Last month, we had an excellent event in the Carpentria Library where we brought all different agencies to talk about fire preparedness. So we're doing a lot of excellent work at the community level at these branches. Now we just need to bring the Friends groups in. And at the Carpinteria event, the Friends groups were a partner with that. And so I do think that we are going in the right direction. It just might take more time than some people want, but we're committed to making every library that we manage as excellent as they can be. And that means having a good relationship with our Friends groups.
Well, that's good. That's exactly the goal, and that's the purpose of having this discussion, is to get to that place as fast as possible. Because I think we've had trouble with our financing partners because there hasn't been as good a communication with the Friends as would be ideal. And I understand it's a zero-sum game, and you only have so much staff to allocate to that task. But to me, that has added to the complexity politically of getting the partnerships to be understanding of the financial needs. And so to me, that's sort of step one. If you don't have that communication, you don't have that partnership that's solid, that understands the numbers and believes in the numbers, then you have a much harder time getting to the finish line together. And that, I understand that you're working really hard to expand programs and things, but at the same time, when that is not managed and that isn't attended to as well as it could, then we have other things we have to deal with that are consequential and significant. And that's the point of me bringing this up. That's the reason to put this on the table, to say, if you can't do it with the existing staff, then we need to look harder at providing you with the resources to do that. So I'm trusting that you're, and nobody else is talking, so I'll stop talking and let my colleagues add into this conversation. But, I personally feel very strongly about this, and maybe I should let my colleagues talk to see if they agree, and we can stop talking about it if it's just me. Member Dominguez.
Boy, this year the library has been the gift that keeps us talking. A little bit of like library gate. So it's hard to address these issues that come up one time in a century with kind of a best practices approach. I think I was in lockstep with Mr. Hart. The one thing that gives me pause today is seeing these revenue numbers, and you could hear me wearing my fiscal conservative hat talking about the $500,000. So anything where we're going to have to spend money, I do really appreciate the fact that you came with a revenue neutral idea. I don't appreciate the fact that it doesn't mean another person. But I think maybe a way to compromise is if you want to come up with a P5, one of your performance measures that captures how the library is doing with our external stakeholders, and then we just leave it up to you to figure out how to reach that goal. Maybe you could work with Christy Schmidt or someone who does that kind of on a regular basis, and that'll give you a goal to shoot for. And I like for people to have goals. You're a very successful, highly professional person, and I think if we gave you a goal or you came up with the goals and we agreed, you'd have no problem knocking it out. So that's, I think, how we can possibly reconcile the positions. I'm open to anything, but that's what I'll throw out there. And can I just ask the question about the $500,000? Is that something that the organization needs now as seed money, if we know, or do we need to ask them? For the library?
For the library plaza. So that, we consider that a capital project, and so we consider that if you wanted to prioritize that coming from capital funding, either Measure C or your general fund capital budgets. We provided you with proposed capital budgets for those two, so we'd have to find something to scale back to come up with that $500,000. The way it's been presented to me and your discussions prior has been that is kind of an initial set aside of city money to show that this is a priority project, that we would then take from that money and begin the final design drawings and building permits to get the project ready for construction. And with that, I believe the foundation said they would go and try to fundraise money for the construction cost. The other benefit of doing the final design is that it gives you a better cost estimate of what the project really is going to cost. Right now, we're working off a number that's 5 to 7 years old, and so don't trust that completely and would like to get a new updated number.
Thank you very much for that answer. And is there wiggle room at this point to change the design in such a manner that makes it more security conscious and possibly cheaper without impacting the primary goal of the design or the primary aesthetic of the design? Or is it such that it's so specific that
It's never too late to change the design. So,
I'm trying to figure out a way to bring all these
exactly.
concepts together.
I pause because I'm not sure I can visualize what you mean about the security enhancements that you'd like to see. If it's including fencing it off, that would be a very important conversation with the Historic Landmarks Commission and other stakeholders and that sort of stuff. If it's more cameras and that sort of thing, that's different. I do think that a lot of thought went into the design about, by design, trying to create a better, safer area. That was one of the motivations of redoing Library Plaza, was that very reason. So some of that's built in, not sure the scope you're thinking about, but clearly we have preliminary design approval from HLC, which is great, but it's not done. And
Okay.
so there's certainly opportunity.
And probably taking out the reflecting pools will save some money. And thinking about the timing, once we make that decision, and if we do have a problem, say if revenues keep dropping or SB1 is taken off the books, do we have the ability to change our commitment to that funding? Or is that locked in once we take a vote as a council?
Mr. Chair, Member Dominguez, it's locked in once you enter into a design contract to do final design, but you can always put a stop work order on that as well. So, you're committing the money, you're putting it aside. If you tell us to go start spending the money now, we will. And then if November turns out that we're losing SB1 and you kind of say, hey, if SB1 doesn't pass, bring this back immediately, we might want to halt the project, midstream where you are, something we could do.
Or find an alternative way to finance it?
You bet, right.
So would it be possible to put it into the books but not spend the money, like you're saying, until November? And in terms of the timing with the neighbor and the work they're doing, I know you just mentioned one of the reasons for getting the design work started is to see the ultimate costs. But in terms of if we pushed it back until November, would that change when we'd be able to break dirt?
Yes, by 6 months.
Because we're able to start, the design is going to take long enough where they're going to be finished.
Yeah.
Because I've heard it's going to take them 2 or 3 more years. Do
So-
we have a...
Sorry. You're talking about the museum project. I think in the museum, if they had their preference, they would probably use it as a staging area for years. What I've been hearing and have promised to you all is that their permit expires in August. If they request additional time, we'll bring it to you all for a discussion, and we can set the terms about how longer they're in. I think final design and building permit generally ballpark takes you about a year. So you're not ready, even if you have all the money, to start construction for a year. So you can have that conversation with the museum. But you hold all those moving pieces. Do you want to set the money aside?
Well, and that's my worry about this timing is we haven't evolved those discussions further enough this week to we're really looking at a crystal ball that isn't super accurate. And this is the problem with dealing with these requests at the last minute. It's a super valid request, but we don't have the time to have those conversations, because if we do stop them from staging, what does that mean to their construction?
And that's a conversation we would have to have with them. They would have to find another area to do the staging that they're doing currently on Library Plaza if we're ready to start construction.
So another parking lot down the street, or the street itself, or what are legitimate options that people like them have done in the past?
I haven't looked at that. I don't know if Mr. Wilshire is still here, if he has any thoughts about what they would look at. They're essentially a private construction
Right.
firm, so they'd have to figure out
And
what
that
they would
construction
do.
is having a very heavy impact on the businesses on that street. So if we do something that's going to make it worse and take longer and impact more businesses, that's something that I want to have as part of this discussion, whether we need to proceed with all due haste.
Committee Member Dominguez, Mike Wilshire, Facilities and Energy Manager. I came up here to not say all that much, but it's a downtown construction project. It would be disruptive. Them having the plaza right next door is great, but they would have to figure that out. There would be options for staging Library Plaza construction and the museum construction. It would inevitably add cost to the library construction project for logistics, but there are downtown construction projects and they make it work, so they would have to find somewhere relatively nearby or work logistically with the Library Plaza to kind of do it in stages.
But it would end up extending the aggravation or moving it to a new set of aggrieved parties. The La Arcada would probably be happy, and the stores across the street would be happy, but it would create a whole new set of people who are impacted.
Inevitably, it'd be nice to talk to the museum and see exactly what stage they're at in their construction project, to see what kind of materials or how big that staging area is going to be overlapping with the plaza project, because then you get a better handle on size constraints that they have.
Is there a way to facilitate that conversation this week? I know you've been in communication, and I know it's not always easy.
I think it's unrealistic to think that we'll get a good answer out of them by Wednesday at 6 p.m.
I could probably call and get an answer.
You can. We've had conversations with them. We're trying to be good neighbors and try to help facilitate their project. It's a large, privately funded project in the heart of downtown, which is great. I just always want to remind us of that fact, that it's good that the art museum is investing, $50 million plus into their property. That's good for the city. They would like to stay on Library Plaza. That's going to be their first answer. And I think if we say, no, you need to move off, they'll say, okay, when? And depending upon when, they'll then have to factor in what their needs are. Can they accommodate more on site? Where would they look in the neighborhood? Don't know. And to answer your other question, could you put the money aside but say don't start spending it until we see the outcome of any potential recall of SB1? Yes, that's certainly something you could do.
And the other thing I was going to mention about that is just the optics of the situation. It seems like this library conversation since last summer, there's been a lot of underlying themes that I don't want to regurgitate those here, but spending $500,000 this week on this type of project is probably not the best optics, and or hiring another person to go do PR is going to probably have a lot of people say, see, I told you so, and that's it.
Councilmember Friedman?
Okay, great discussion. So I'll start with the discussion that Councilmember Hart put up. I am hesitant to spend money on a position now, given our fiscal numbers, but of course we need to have the best communication that we can come up with. And I think a way to go about that first would be to work with our friends and kind of just have a sit down with them and say what communication is working, where would you like to see the enhancements, and talking with them, and then you bring that back to us when we consider it in the future, because I think that's where we want to look at is where are the gaps, and talking to them directly, because there is a lot of good communication that's taking place, but we can always do better. So I think just having those discussions with them on where they think we could improve would help us make an informed decision whenever that may be down the line. In terms of the Plaza project itself, I am supporting, of course, the $500,000 for that project for a number of reasons. In regards to setting aside the money and then not spending it or maybe pulling it out later, I understand where you're coming from and it makes sense, but there's also another side, and that's the foundation, because it would make it really difficult for them to go out and form a capital campaign and saying, we have this seed money from the city, but so they need a firm commitment in order to go out and do the work they're doing. And the fact that we have a foundation that can help us raise significant portions or a significant amount of this capital project, it actually over time will reduce our capital projects long term. So I think we need to give them what they're looking for, and Ms. Howard spoke to that today, is a firm commitment for them to go out and be able to start their capital campaign. They have it ready to go. It's up to us to make that happen. And so the other component is that having final design will also enable them to reach out to specific donors as well. So the more we can have that project vetted out, finalized, and ready to go, for them it makes their capital campaign that much more effective. And in terms of just that Plaza project itself, I want to remind everyone that there was approximately $2 million that was previously allocated to it when we had the RDA. That was removed when the state took it away. So it's a previously funded project. In addition, we're looking at downtown and what can we do to enhance downtown. One is invest in our infrastructure, and we already know what the prior plaza or the current plaza looks like, and it just doesn't work. If you compare the courthouse or the other areas, the current configuration of the plaza, it's just not up to par with those. So bringing that up, there's the Granada project that's taking place in that back parking lot that is part of a connecting corridor, walking path that we saw slides here, and enhancing the plaza will get from basically Victoria all the way down to Figueroa on a walkway. So I think we need to move forward with that as part of this project and go to final design. So those are the two in the library. Do we want to?
Well, actually, we had a speaker come in late. Ms. Rodriguez wanted to speak about the fire department budget. So if you want to come up quickly and let us know what you're thinking about that.
Thanks for your time and consideration. I wanted to share with you, which I hope that you're aware of already, Monique Limon, our assembly member, her bill was passed in the assembly last week. It's Bill 1877, which requires natural disaster-related emergency information to be made available in the most commonly spoken language other than English. So that demonstrates that it was recognized the lack of communication for the Spanish language community. This was a direct result of the Thomas Fire and Montecito debris flow. And I tagged some of you on Facebook, so thank you, Councilmember Dominguez, for following up on that. There was a request for folks who were affected to go to a link and fill out information provided by the National Weather Department or something like that, but it was only in English. So it was going to leave out a huge amount of people who speak Spanish only that were directly affected by this emergency situation, and they were not going to get their feedback. Councilmember Dominguez followed up on my request for Spanish access, and the weather department apparently was able to provide that in Spanish. However, the fire department didn't put out a notice in Spanish. They didn't say in Spanish the same information that was delivered in English. So the thought that we can still continue to use in-house resources to fund or to make up the difference, it's proving it's not working. So we need to have simultaneous information in both English and Spanish. It's not impossible. The Santa Barbara School Board or School District does it and does it well. And it just seems like the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so where time is short, and just looking at that list, so we have a presentation later this afternoon from the city attorney. Is there a way to fund that? Is that?
Good question. I think for next year, for those that are ongoing, if we're looking to fund those, we may have to look to one-time funding for next year and then recognize that we're going to have to deal with that in 2020. We don't have any ongoing sources to fund that today. So anything up there that is ongoing is going to probably come out of some one-time money, whether that be reserves or anything else we can come up with. Certainly the things that are one time, we can look to reserves or maybe even appropriate a reserve, something like that. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Councilmember Dominguez, you had a question?
So the total down at the bottom, the 1.1, that does not include the 500,000?
It does not, because again, we assume that the 500,000 would be a reallocation of existing allocations that we recommended and you went over from both Measure C and General Fund revenues. We have a list of all that, so if there's a recommendation to fund that from that list, we have an overhead that we can show you as to what's currently being proposed, and you can have a conversation about where that might come from.
And right now, this would be like a $1.6 million withdrawal from the general fund. This is all this is coming from the general fund?
No, I would still say it's 1.1. Again, the $500,000, unless you wanted to keep exactly what we've proposed and then add 500,000, that 500,000 would have to come from reserves. We wouldn't have any other source for that. Again, we assume that the 500 would be reshuffling the existing $22 million we have from Measure C and about $1.3 million or $4 million that we had from our normal general fund capital program.
I'm confused. Where's the money coming from?
It's
Eliminating some other projects that are
Yeah.
in the capital fund.
And in fact, if you want to
Reprioritizing those
Right.
funds.
So when would that conversation take place?
now,
Do we have a list of programs we'd eliminate?
yes, we have a list of what we've proposed for our capital program for next year. Again, the large majority is coming from Measure C. And I know Brandon could probably fix that.
So there's two sources of capital that I think you could look at. This is the general fund capital program. So this is the amount that we have every year. And you can see in the recommended budget is at about $1.9 million of general fund capital. And you can see the project descriptions down the middle column. So you could look for $500,000 out of there to say we're going to defer one of those projects and instead prioritize Library Plaza for final design. Or you could go to the other sheet, which is the Measure C sheet, and find $500,000 and reprioritize Library Plaza to be a higher priority than some portion of that for $500,000. That's our recommendation. You could also, add it to just the general fund operating list, but we don't think that makes sense. We think that you should work within the two capital programs to make your priorities known.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're running out of time. Just so I'm on the record, I think that the $500,000 commitment to the Library Plaza project is a really good idea and necessary for, taking advantage of the potential funding partnership with the foundation. That's really a great investment, and we should be looking at every opportunity we can have like that to take our dollars and have them leveraged to go farther. If there were other opportunities to do that with some of these other projects, obviously probably aren't with those, the Measure C projects, but maybe some of the other general funded capital projects. That would be a good principle to me, is to invest in things that have the potential to generate additional return. But I don't honestly know how we're going to put all this together when we don't know enough about all the other pieces of the puzzle. For example, the city attorney's budget request. Councilmember Friedman?
I was going to recommend if we can possibly, especially the ongoing, since there's a long-term fiscal impact to that, would be to look at just the one-time projects, in this case being the plaza, and then the downtown economic development strategic plan and the Visit Santa Barbara request. And if those are something that we want to do one time this year, and then the ongoing ones, we would have to, based on time, have the full council consider that on Wednesday night. So would you be amenable to looking at the one time just today in the interest of time?
Sure. Do you have thoughts on those?
Yeah, I was going to recommend for the Visit Santa Barbara, I like the idea of looking at where the TOT comes from and the percentages there. It is a request for 150, but it's down to 130, according to what you've said, and you're still going to reach out to the county. So wait to put a number out there, but definitely it's not the 150 anymore. So kind of hearing back from you where that's at, but I would be supportive of contributing toward that effort from the city. And then the Downtown Economic Development Strategic Plan, I am supportive of that proposal. Considering that downtown, there are a lot of conversations that have been taking place along with a lot of our community groups and partners, Coast Village Association, Downtown Santa Barbara, Visit Santa Barbara, the Chamber of Commerce, the workshop that we were at, Councilmember Dominguez, that we were at about 2 weeks ago. And this position, as I understand it, would be to bring all those ideas together, look at what's coming up organically from within our own community for downtown, and then also look at what other communities have been doing for best practices. And it gives our city administrator's office the additional capacity to work on that this year and come back with recommendations for us in a year or so. Is that correct? Somewhere around that time frame. Could give or take, but come back with us with some definite recommendations, not only what we're doing, but it can also help what our partner entities can do in terms of downtown. Because the future of downtown is not just about what we're going to do here at the city, it's what all of us, or our organizations that are investing down there. So I think given where we are, and I don't feel like waiting a year is something we should do, so I'd be supportive of that. And is that the only other one time?
Councilmember Dominguez?
So I think the Economic Development Strategic Plan, I'm not sure exactly what people are talking about when they say that. Do you know what that would provide that we don't already have?
Well, basically, as I've been talking with individuals and from downtown and business leaders, is that there's a lot of conversations that are taking place right now, but they're fragmented. Some of them are higher level, but there's a lot of great ideas out there. So what this would do is go out and look at what those ideas are, who's proposing them, how they fit together, and looking at it from a comprehensive level, and then also going out and looking at best practices that other communities are doing and working with our council and our partners to bring back basically a unified plan that we could get behind and going into the future on that. So that's what it's looking at, and Mr. Casey could, if you want to elaborate on it, but that's what it is. And the other component of it is the city administrator's office has only a certain number of capacity for projects, not just this, but all the projects that are taking place within his office that we're asking him to look at. We just looked at libraries, and so this would be somebody who could specifically focus on economic future of downtown to give that extra capacity to work with. So that's what it is.
So, and thank you for that explanation. I'm concerned that we don't have a concrete vision what this is going to provide. I'm concerned this is just for downtown, and we have several business zones in our city: Coast Village Road, Milpas, Delavina, Upper State Street, Middle State Street. So I think we're throwing money at a problem without a clear vision where this goes. The downtown organization paid for a retail study, and there's a list of concrete suggestions that no one has started acting on. So I think buying a plan for $50,000 that's going to sit on the shelf next to a plan we already have is, particularly given our budget situation, doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm open to something if later on we get a really strong business case for it, but right now I just don't see that business case. I agree with you on Visit Santa Barbara. And the public education coordinator, is that person going to be serving more departments and they're just based in fire, or is that fire only?
Committee members, Dominguez, they will be based in fire and working primarily in fire, but we work citywide on messaging during disasters, emergencies, and even daily messaging. So I see it, we'd be working throughout the city.
So thank you for that answer. My concern there is that we spread that person out a little more. I'm happy that you're willing to host the person in fire, but I think police department probably has a more involved ongoing day-to-day, week-to-week when there's not an emergency, a need for that. And then other agencies could probably benefit from someone to help with translation and interpretation. So if that person's not actively training people at a particular time, it would be great if we could have that person working, for example, with the city administrator's office on their larger scale messaging. So is that something that could be tweaked in this current proposal, or how would we look at this? Is there models from other cities that we've examined?
Again, this is a request that's come from the public kind of late in the process, so we haven't had a whole lot of time to look at it. When we have been talking about it, it depends on what your vision of this position is. If it's disaster service and recovery communication in a bilingual manner, I do think that having that in your emergency operations section of your fire department makes sense. That does cover other departments, working with police department and that sort of stuff. If it's more just general bilingual outreach and you want to kind of staff up and beef up our resources, then it might belong under the city administrator's office, where we have a communications team, not a huge team, but a small team, and have it be housed there. And so we kind of looked at it from those two different perspectives about where it should live. Based upon the conversations you all have had in the public so far, it seems like it's been more on the emergency preparedness side, which is why at this point we're saying if you want to do a fully funded position, it would be in the fire department.
Thank you.
Councilmember Friedman?
I was going to make a motion, but if you want to.
Well, I guess, now that I did not realize we had council at 2:30, so we have a little more time. So the stress of the moment is past a little bit. So just going through the list, what you're telling, to make sure I'm hearing this correctly, for the city attorney's offices, even though it's defined as an ongoing expense, because it is, you're adding staff, you're proposing that you're going to use one-time revenues to pay for that for a year and then just have to reevaluate in the future. Then the Library Plaza, that the proposal is to reallocate or just look at other projects within the Measure C or General Fund Capital list to reallocate that if that was the desire of the majority of the Finance Committee. I guess maybe we can come back to that. Then the Public Education Coordinator, just a question of whether it's half-time or full-time or where it's going to be. The library, we're hoping that the county is going to take that number off of the board by fully paying for what we had originally proposed with the county. And then the loss of revenue, that is an ongoing issue that remains to be seen, and you're proposing that you're just going to have to look at that on a month-to-month basis in the next fiscal year and address that. It's not an actual change to the budget right now.
No, actually, Committee Member Hart, we are proposing to lower our estimates next year, and we'd essentially be out of balance, and we would be proposing using reserves, the Economic Contingency Reserve, what it's for, to cover that shortfall. And then we would have to deal with that structural problem in FY20.
So you'd be asking us to adopt a budget that does not fully funded reserves this year?
Right. That's correct. And again, we said that before. We mentioned that that's a potential that if, depending on the impacts we're seeing, that we would have to look to those reserves next year because it's too hard to respond in short order. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be using policy reserves because we may end the year this year with reserves above policy because of the mutual aid activity we've had. I don't know yet, but we think there's a possibility that we would still, even with this proposal, have our reserves intact.
Okay, so what does that mean for this budget cycle?
It means so our proposal would be using reserves next year to cover that shortfall of revenues, the Economic Contingency Reserve. It may or may not mean the use of policy reserves. That use of reserves may come from reserves above policy, is what I'm saying. We just don't know that for sure yet.
So we're being asked to vote on a budget that does not fully fund reserves, but the possibility exists that that will not happen because we'll have unanticipated revenue from mutual aid that would mean that the reserves are fully funded.
That's correct.
Okay. Why couldn't we just assume that the mutual aid funding is going to come in and vote to have a fully funded reserve budget and then adjust accordingly if that didn't happen?
So we close the books in August, September. We won't know the final numbers until September or October in terms of where we end the year. A lot of moving parts of the revenues. We don't know the rest of the months for TOT, what that's going to look like. We do know mutual aid, we have a pretty good estimate of that. We don't know what expenditure savings from salaries are going to be. There's just a lot of moving parts to where we end the year, how much we're going to need to cover next year's growth in budget and reserve requirements. So, I can give you a ballpark, but I couldn't be sure. I think we're going to be okay and end up not having to use policy reserves to cover that revenue shortfall. I just can't be sure for sure. I can't tell you that that's true for sure.
Okay, and then continuing down the economic development strategic plan, we talked about that. Visit Santa Barbara, we talked about that. The amount from parks for street trees, the $95,000, was that absorbed within the Parks Department budget, or is that additional on top of this?
Mr. Chair, I believe you brought that up in the context of Measure C and the streets funding. And did we want to add planting of trees as part of the streets capital program? And so I believe that's where the question came from, and we're looking for direction if you want us to include that in the Measure C streets capital. It either could be absorbed and just say that's an added cost that goes into that program and absorb it and do, $95,000 less of pavement work, or make some other priority choice in that regard.
And that's not on this list because it wasn't clear whether it should be on this list?
Correct.
Okay.
But that's why we brought it back, though, and responded to you and looking for guidance on that.
All right, well, it's to the committee. And do we want to look at do we want to get into the reallocating of the Measure C and general fund capital projects to look at that? Do you want to put those up on the board and take a look at see if there are things that make sense. Is there anything that staff would recommend that there's a way to squeeze in the $500,000 for the library plaza?
Boy, I have not had a chance to talk to my department heads about that to give you kind of a unified thought on that. It's hard because they're all priority projects. And so it does kind of come down to a policy choice on your end as well as what those priorities are. A couple things stand out to me, and they might be on the other list, Brandon, if you could. It's hard. The pavement side on Public Works and the streets infrastructure is where you're investing a lot of money, but that has always been your priority from a Measure C standpoint. And so, but do you want to look at carving out $500,000 from that? We could come with a recommendation for you about where that would come from on Wednesday night if that was a priority. Another one, the Louise Lowry Davis Center renovation. It's a priority. It's designed. It's ready to go. It's also one of the city assets that I think we're going to look at for the police department location. Don't know where that conversation is going to go. That's going to happen over the next 4 to 6 months. Internally, I'm going to hold off spending the money on the renovation until we know what's happening at Louise Lowry Davis Center. That's another one. And then you can see all the facility maintenance and renewal projects down at the bottom, but those have been priorities for us to get to. So it's hard for me. If you can give me a little guidance about some stuff to look at, and then I could go and talk to my department heads as well and bring back a recommendation on Wednesday night. If the decision is, yes, Library Plaza is important, we want to fund it, go find a way.
Okay. Councilmember Friedman?
Well, for the plaza, I think given we've heard from the foundation and the discussion we've had, and that the Louise Lowry Davis Center, that's currently under consideration for the police station. So I do want to go forward with the plaza project. I do support that, and looking at that potential source, I think would be a good option for now, especially since that money is kind of tied up for foreseeable future for 4 to 6 months. Or if there's a hybrid, we could do of that and another source from Measure C.
Sounds like the place. Well, that does sound like the place to start, is with the Louise Lowry Davis Center renovation, given the site questions about the location of the police department. That does not feel like the best way to invest that money, and that's a large enough amount of money to accommodate the Library Plaza, and also have $371,000 additional dollars to reallocate to the general fund, some of the general fund requests, which I guess, if we were looking at the...
Mr. Chair, before you go too far on that, this is Measure C capital that we're talking about.
Oh, excuse me. Well, there you go.
So
That's
I'm not sure we
help.
want to do that.
Yep, thank you.
Let us look at that and see what we recommend. If Louise Lowry Davis is not chosen as the site of the police department, I do think that's a project we would be interested in trying to finish. So let us see if maybe we want to hold back some of that money to then couple with a project the next fiscal year.
Councilmember Dominguez.
What's the timing on the site selection?
About 4 to 6 months would be my guess. We're going to be at council tomorrow, actually, with a presentation on an update of the police station project. We are bringing an architect on board, and first charge is for them to do a little space planning needs assessment and also site selection process, working with the council subcommittee that you all already appointed to do some initial analysis. But I think it probably takes at least 4 to 6 months, if not longer, to kind of land on a property you want to pursue.
And seems like another reason we might want to consider pushing this decision off or make it contingent on our funding assumptions being correct. That would solve many problems.
Well, let's see. Can we look at the general fund capital list as well? I wonder if the citywide wayfinding sign program, that is that's the last phase of that project. And that is, there's really no criticality to the timing of that. It's something to finish, but it's not, there's no economy of scale to doing it at this point. It's another order of signs. It's installation of those. If that didn't happen this fiscal year, it wouldn't cost any more the next fiscal year. Is it that kind of a thing?
Yeah, I like the project though, to be honest. I like trying to finish it. It's something that you now kind of have half signs up, half signs down. And just from kind of completing the plan and kind of seeing it through, I'm worried that if we don't, it just gets lost over time and you never come back and do it. But that's just my personal opinion on that one. But that is certainly, any of these projects are fair game, so.
In the Ortega Park renovation, that is the planning for that effort? That is...
Chair Hart and committee members, yes, as you know, we just initiated the first phase of concept master plan development. In fact, we had our community workshop on Saturday. We anticipate that by November we'll be before council with our recommended master plan concept, and these funds would be dedicated towards actually moving forward to developing the design plans for the park renovation.
And what's the approximate cost of the ultimate renovations?
Chair Hart and committee members, it really depends on where we go. The park hasn't had investment for quite some time. Whether we come back with recommendations to rebuild a swimming pool, for example, in that site, whether we'll be looking at recommending all synthetic turf fields, which are raised as something that's important. It'll depend. It's certainly a location where phased construction would be possible once we have the whole site planned. We wouldn't anticipate necessarily that we'd ever build the whole park in one fell swoop.
But what is the range of costs for the various planning scenarios?
Chair Hart and committee members, it could be, if it included a pool, a couple of $1 million. Whether we can refurbish what we currently have, that's part of what we're looking at right now. We have a pool design consultant on board to give us an idea of what the options are relative to where existing infrastructure is, what we can reuse. There's aspects of the park we can certainly reuse, and that will trigger a bunch of different options. So we anticipate that we would be back as part of the master plan presentation with that range of options of park improvements, which would also include the scaling of those park improvements.
So it's a $2 million as a floor to a $5 million as a ceiling, or?
Chair Hart, yes, and committee members, it could be as much as that, and it really depends on the scale of the improvements that we put in place. One of the great advantages of having synthetic turf fields, as we all know, is they can be used all the time, year-round. That's not the case that we currently have in any of our parks that have active fields, and so there are a number of times out of the year that those parks are closed for that type of use. We do also generate revenue when we have programmed use of those areas, so it's that balancing of investment to provide a service, but then also to generate revenue to support both the programs and the operations.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions about projects that are on these lists? Councilmember Dominguez?
Is the library elevator on this list or the other list? Okay.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. I'm hearing from the crowd. We're working on the design during FY19, and so we're proposed funding it in FY20. And again, we think that is kind of a priority critical, just basic facility improvement we need to do there for the library.
What about the $100,000 for walkways and building pathways? What is that?
Back. Chair Hart. Yeah, that's an ongoing funding to help support our ADA transition plan. So there's ADA transition plan, which focuses primarily on facilities, buildings, and the walkways and pathways are the walkways surrounding buildings. historically, we use that funding to support some parks projects. They often need pathway upgrades, and the Cabrillo Ballpark's a good example. This year, we used some of this fiscal year's funding to upgrade the pathways and ADA compliant walkways around that facility.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, this is a dilemma. And
I guess, Mr. Chair, I'd like to hear from the committee if finding $500,000 for the Library Plaza is a priority, and then let us take the next 48 hours to give you some recommendations. We've kind of heard a little bit of your reaction so far. Let me huddle with my staff and see if we can come up with something for you. But,
Okay.
but I'd like to get confirmation that that is a priority that you'd like us to go
yeah,
off
I think
and
a
do that
motion
work.
would be appropriate, so we're real clear. Councilmember
Then
Friedman?
I'll move $500,000 towards the Library Plaza project.
Is there a second? Councilmember Dominguez, you have a question?
So the motion was to have staff take a look at this and come back with some proposals?
Yes.
Okay, I would second that.
Okay, let's just take that then. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed and abstain? Okay, that's a big chunk of this. Let's go back to the overall list, if you would, Thank you, Mr. Burdette. All right, so do you need direction from us? You need direction from us on all of these elements, so let's start wherever anybody wants to start.
The only thing I might recommend is waiting on the first item for city attorney to present the full scope of what they're proposing. It is really connected to what community development is proposing and is fully funded in terms of staffing, so they're kind of work together. We would have to come back on Wednesday with some ideas how we pay for that. So that's the only thing I would say about that list.
Okay, well then I guess we'll just start at the top then. The Public Education Coordinator is the next one after the Library Plaza. Councilmember Dominguez?
So I would move that we recommend that to the full council.
I'll second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Are there any thoughts to, well, I guess what we're gonna end up doing, I think, is supporting all of these things, and then leaving it up to staff to figure out a way to pay for it, and that's gonna come out of reserves, and I think we need to be thinking about that in the context of each of these individual decisions. Or we can revisit them when we see the impact of that at the council discussion about that in the context of everything else. So motions, Councilmember Friedman?
A question on the on this one. Is this for a full-time or is it for a half-time?
Councilmember Dominguez has his finger up in the air saying this is for a full-time position. Okay.
And this is forwarded to the full council for discussion, and I think the full council should have a discussion on this, so I'll support moving it.
So we're recommending it for the council to approve, or we're moving it forward for discussion?
I think both. This just gives staff further certainty that they're not spinning their wheels if it comes to full council, obviously. We could even change our minds once it gets there, but I think we think there's enough support from the community and the council that
Yeah, I mean, clearly the council's going to make a decision on this, but we're looking for, if to the extent you can, make a recommendation on any of these items that council then can hear. Because we'll be presenting that to them on the 6th, your recommendations.
Well, I guess my view is that it is important, and it would be great to have it. The fact that we have a half-time position now is progress, and I don't know that we can go all the way to getting everything this budget cycle, because I think there's going to have to be some shaving of these things. So I won't support the motion to recommend that we fully fund it, but I'll be open to hearing what staff creatively does when in front of the full council. So anybody else want to comment before we vote? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That carries 2-1. And then the next item on the library, it looks like we're hopeful that the county is going to backfill that amount, and that will not be an issue. The TOT and sales tax revenues, staff is going to adjust accordingly and propose using reserves. Does anybody want to make a motion on that?
I'm not sure what that motion would be. I guess they're bringing us Mr. Samario.
Yeah, I don't think you need a motion on that one. I think that's something we just need to do.
Okay.
And just recognizing that it's going to come out of reserves.
And then the Downtown Economic Development Strategic Plan. Anybody want to make a motion on that?
I did bring it forward, but in light of all the challenges, I'll make a motion to forward it to the council for consideration. But being that there are other priorities, interested to see what my colleagues have to say.
Okay. Councilmember Dominguez, do you have any thoughts on that, or you've already spoken to that? I think I share your view. This is the kind of thing that would be potentially valuable, but the downtown organization does have a retail study that is on the shelf that has elements that, really to me are kind of the nuts and bolts of that. You start with those, cleaning up storefronts, cleaning up businesses, the buildings, doing a better job of working with the employers or the downtown businesses on marketing. Those kinds of things are the basic elements of a economic development strategic plan that ought to be implemented. So I won't necessarily support moving this forward. Your motion is, we don't need a motion? Okay.
Yeah, and just one quick comment on that. I think zoning is our sharpest tool to address some of the downtown issues. So it's not that I want to deal with it. I really want to deal with it. I have a big chunk of downtown in my district, but I'm just not sure right now this is the right idea. So
Okay. And then finally, the Visit Santa Barbara request for additional funding. Any comments on that?
So I'll move that we forward this to the council for support it. We need to tighten what the number is based on the TOT, and we can get that by Wednesday night. Or do you need a number from us from right now?
I mean, I think it'd be helpful to get a number. I will tell you that we will look to whatever you approve. If you approve anything, might spread it out over not just the general fund. Maybe look at waterfront, downtown parking. So maybe see if we can reduce the impact of the general fund.
Well, I'd support up to $100,000 for that, being that there's already another 20,000 they're still going out, and we can look at different areas. So I'd move $100,000 towards this effort.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed and abstained? No one? Okay.
Mr. Chair, and any feedback on spreading it out amongst the different funds?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. I definitely can make a nexus argument about waterfront and the benefit that they have, the leaseholders in Stearns Wharf. This is the number one visited location in the city of Santa Barbara. So, having that additional 1% on the slip holders revenue is part of the financial viability of the harbor. That makes a lot of sense to me. Anybody else have any comments about that?
I agree.
And then there was one little item I think that's hanging out there. There's the street trees issue. I don't know that we can recommend that. Does anybody want to make a motion about that? This is, I think, $95,000 of additional funding that potentially would come out of Measure C, but to be determined. I'm concerned about. I mean, we need to do this. This has been lagging with the drought, but taking the money out of pavement and trying to maintain focus on the PCI goal of 70 is extremely important in that light. Councilmember Dominguez?
I would recommend just that idea, although you maybe mentioned it in the not supportive context. But yeah, I would because it is on the order of $15+ million that we're putting into streets and pavements, and this is 95, and it does represent value to the city. I would support that. I would make a motion that we accept that.
Okay, the motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Matter carries 2-1. And then there is one last item that isn't necessarily a cost element, but it was raised by the Creeks Advisory Committee, and that is a little bit more clarification about street sweeping and revenues and expenditures. I know there's an old memo from Public Works from 2015 that kind of describes how that works. I would like to see staff update that, bring us more current information, explain exactly how the street sweeping revenues are allocated to the Creeks Division, so to make sure that there's real clarity on that, and that would be something that could just come along later as an item, maybe to the Finance Committee or to the Council as a memo. Is there anything else that we need to address? Does that cover everything?
I think that's everything.
Anything else from committee members? Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you.